Cases were brought last year. Prosecutor has urged speedy trials, with which I agree. And this is now in the hands of the judicial system, not in our hands. Special prosecutors followed the facts and the law. They brought cases when they thought they were ready.
Attorney General Merrick Garland making rare public comments on Jack Smith's cases to CNN this week, urging a speedy trial. Garland hitting on the big question of the moment, which is when or even if Jack Smith's cases go to trial. The federal election interference case remains on pause while Trump's attempt to get the case thrown out over claims of presidential immunity makes its way through the appeals process. A decision on that from an appeals court could be imminent, but every day that goes by without a ruling throws that March 4th trial date further into question. Adding to the doubt over the trial date, the judge overseeing this case, Tanya Chutkan, acknowledged in a ruling yesterday that it would likely get delayed. We are back with Tim and with Basil. Tim, it is not every day we hear from Merrick Garland. What do you make of his comments?
He's a very careful lawyer, Alicia, and prosecutors generally can't make out-of-court statements about the evidence in a case, make any sort of prediction. They can, though, talk more broadly about the fact that a case needs to be resolved and defend sort of the integrity of the process. And Merrick Garland walked that line in his comments. What was also interesting to me in that clip that you played was that he kept talking about the special prosecutor has decided, the special prosecutor has brought the case. The special prosecutor reports to him, but has a great deal of independence. The whole reason why he appointed Jack Smith as special counsel was to ensure that this was completely distant from the traditional role at justice because of his appointment by President Biden. He wanted to insulate this matter from politics as much as possible, and that is really what informed his appointment of the special prosecutor. And in that interview, he kept saying the special prosecutor has made these decisions. He has the power to overrule those decisions, but I don't believe he has. I think what he is saying there is that Jack Smith has been running this investigation, making charging decisions, urging a speedy trial, and again, reinforcing Jack Smith's independence.
Basil, I think we all understand the sense of urgency. And for Trump, of course, it has been about the opposite. It's not about winning this case. It's about delaying this case. So even the fact that we're still waiting on a decision from the appeals court, it theoretically works in his favor, right?
Oh, sure. It absolutely works in his favor. The delay tactic is really important here because for a number of reasons. One, obviously he can continue to incite his base, motivate his base, mobilize his base as he talks about all of these people coming after him. You heard in the deposition in the earlier segment saying, I would be a rich man. I'd be able to do all these things were it not for, everybody coming after me. So he'll be able to continue to make those arguments the longer these processes drag out. But to Tim's point, one of the things that I think Merrick Garland did very well is to walk that line, is sort of reassuring to the American public that we're moving forward. It may not be as quickly as some might like. It may not be as long as others might like, but we are moving in a steady and forthright path here. And that's supposed to be reassuring to everybody. But I would also say that when we think about that March 4th deadline, right around Super Tuesday, so we would know that this nomination for the president is wrapped up at that point. And it'll be really interesting how, as these two sort of events converge, if at all, his language changes.
And Tim, to remind us of what is at stake here, you have Trump doubling down on his claims of just absolute immunity for presidents in general. Here's what he said on Fox last night.
The president of the United States, and I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking about any president, has to have immunity. Look at Biden. What would happen to Biden? What he did in Afghanistan is the most embarrassing moment in the history of our country, giving them $85 billion worth of equipment, killing our soldiers, wounding horribly our soldiers, and leaving people behind. Well, when he leaves office, if he doesn't have immunity, now, I think it's horrible what he did, but he probably, I don't know, it's hard to believe, but he probably meant well. It's hard to believe that he meant well, but the man is incompetent. But you have to leave immunity with the president.
So a few things there, Tim. One is just comparing the Afghanistan withdrawal to Donald Trump's attempt to overturn an election. It would seem as though one of those things is within the scope of the presidency, whether you agree with it or not. The other is not. I also think the other big tell here is that he's trying to say he wants us to apply to all presidents because he doesn't assume that Joe Biden would operate with the criminality with which he himself has operated.
Yeah, it's just an absurd argument, Alicia, to suggest that an honest policy difference, like whether we should or shouldn't have withdrawn from Afghanistan, the manner in which that decision was effectuated, subjects a former president, someday when President Biden is a former president, to criminal responsibility. Again, criminal responsibility requires both a criminal act and some level of intent, depending on the statute. And we are not going to criminalize good faith policy discussions. This is very similar to what you're hearing in the sort of Mayorkas impeachment debate. There are some people in Congress that believe that Secretary Mayorkas should be impeached as a high crime or misdemeanor because they don't agree with his approach to the border, that he isn't being aggressive enough. Again, that's not a crime, a policy disagreement. A crime requires evidence like Jack Smith has put in that indictment that the president specifically intended to interfere with, obstruct, or impede an official proceeding, the joint session of Congress, conspired with others to defraud the United States out of the lawful function of government and deprive Americans of their civil rights, right? That's a high burden for a prosecutor to sustain that the special counsel will be put to when this case is ultimately tried. And that just would no way, I don't see any path to which a withdrawal from Afghanistan or an argument that someone has failed to do enough to secure the border is in any way close to that. So it's just an absurd argument to suggest that everything a president does suddenly in the future, if the Supreme Court or the Court of Appeals finds no immunity, is going to be subject to criminal prosecution. It's just ludicrous.